Hello, everyone. Let me set myself up here and put the spotlight on myself. My name's Chuck Fall. I'm the chief proponent of Green Liberty Bloc. We're building a caucus in every state, and Green Liberty stands for accountability, transparency, protection for whistleblowers to preserve our democracy and restore integrity to our republic. And tonight, my guest is Emanuel Pastreich, and we are talking about building a political truth movement. We're going to explore the topics of his book, the bitter tonic known as truth. We are going to explore, please hold it up. Thank you, Emanuel. We're going to explore the events around the 2024 election and the struggle against the corporate duopoly who have declared war on independent politics. So Emanuel, let's just to make an introduction. You are an independent candidate for the U.S. president. You have a publishing house at Fear No Evil Substack, and so I'll just say that I became acquainted with you through, I think, an article at the Global Research, and you're well published there. And I was taken by your kind of honesty around the problem of living in a society of lies, and where these lies are used by a plutocracy to effect control and trick the public into accepting false narratives. So as a Green Libertarian, I've come into the Green Party and advanced a Green Liberty theme, which is that we should call out the state crimes explicitly and not question if they're real or not, but accept as fact. And that's kind of a foundational point where so we're going to talk immediately about building an independent political truth movement. So I'm going to challenge you now to just give us a quick background on yourself, introduce yourself, and how you responded to kind of the Green Liberty, call and found a kind of home in this pragmatic approach to the problem of corruption. Emanuel, just quick background, and then while explaining also then why you're running for president and what that is all about for you. Go ahead, Emanuel. I'm going to take the spotlight off of myself, and you are on. Go.
Well, I really appreciate it, Chuck. And Chuck, of course, supported me in our 1-month run in the Green Party for the presidential nomination. And we're still in it, not in the Green Party, but at least advocating for truth politics through speeches, through a vision for green liberty. I was originally a professor of Asian studies, so I studied Chinese originally, and then Japanese, and then Korean, and I spent a good amount of time in Korea and Japan in my life. And then when I was professor at University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, I became more politically active, and I guess you'd say diplomatically active, in efforts to respond to the drive for war in East Asia and the militarization of, well, at that time, I thought it was just militarization of U.S. presence in Asia, but I learned it was militarization of the entire American economy. And then with the catastrophes of the 2000 election and basically all the elections thereafter, I was driven finally with the launch of the COVID-19 operation in 2020 to declare myself an independent candidate, in part because I thought it was a way to articulate a vision which no other candidate was capable of, in part because I thought running for president might actually save me, since I was unemployed and forced out of the United States at that time. But it was a great platform, and I really came to believe in the talks with Chuck and everyone else, Hugh here and Tom, the sort of core people, John, that this really has meaning. I guess the analogy I tend to use is the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. The Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, or for that matter, John Brown's stand at Harper's Ferry, that these are events that were total catastrophes if you're thinking about actually winning. However, immediately, right, in a tactical sense. But both of these events were transformative in that the Warsaw Uprising, Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, because a small number of people were willing to completely defy the fascistic governments that existed through most of Europe at the time. It inspired all sorts of other resistance movements to actually get active in 1943, 44. And it really changed the entire dynamic in the same way that John Brown's stand at Harper's Ferry, I mean, it wasn't just him alone, but to say that slavery is not a peculiar institution, it's not a bad policy, but it's an act of war against American citizens, that this really transformed the whole discussion. And I would say just a couple other words on this. Maybe the most essential part of my campaign, continuing campaign, is that it starts with one principle which distinguishes our campaign from any other campaign, and I think distinguishes Green Liberty in that respect. Although I won't want to presume to speak for everyone in Green Liberty, but I would take the position that it's not, as Bernie Sanders or others would say, that we're in danger of losing our democracy, that if we don't stand up to Donald Trump or whoever they pick, that we're going to be increasingly totalitarian, that we're going to lose control of our government, right? And that so therefore you should shovel money to the Democrats or the progressives or the Green Party, right? That our position really ought to be that we're already living in a totalitarian society. We're already in a dictatorship. We're already run by multinational IT corporations, private equity funds, trusts, and multinational investment banks who represent a relatively small number of people. And our campaign, our movement, is to wrest back control, to create a positive cycle in which we have some accountability, we have some the essence of the Constitution actually forms the basis for governance, in which we can move away from unaccountable globalism and get back to something of the idea of internationalism as it existed in a previous age, now totally forgotten, and have actual treaties which are meaningful and that are grounded in the people, in science, and in ethics and ethical principles. So that's I guess how I would define the effort. State crimes is what Chuck mentioned. I think state crimes has two aspects to it. One is the egregious state crimes which we've faced. Of course, they go way back in history to the Roman Empire, but there are specific ones that we can identify over the last 20 years or over the last 60 years. But the other part of that is the state sort of institutionalized state crimes, in which we have institutions like the Federal Reserve, whole sections of the what's called euphemistically the intelligence community and the Department of Defense, which are institutionalized state crimes. They launder money, they create wars in order to bring profits to investment banks and bankers. They attack citizens, right, and control us. I mean, I think Green Liberty itself, in our run last year in the Green Party, we were quite strong. I think we had a good group of people. We had something to talk about. We had a strong appeal, and we were basically shut down. No money, no response from anybody. As you may know, I tried to join the Massachusetts branch of the Green Party, and I was rejected. They would not even accept me as a member. So I see that, and this is just my personal opinion, as most likely not the Green Party at all, but rather there's a whole group of private intelligence firms who work on homeland security budgets, and they have these budgets for anti-disinformation, which they use to stop anybody who's engaged in real politics. And so we end up with a bunch of clowns and puppets because it's actually illegal. So I would conclude by saying what I said a moment ago, which is that the way to make progress, the step forward, is first to recognize that we're living in a totalitarian system. And in this election, and that's what we'll discuss today, the question is, how do we respond to this? How do we respond to a system in which the media, education, communication, means of production, food, medicine are all being taken over by this cartel of multinational investment banks and private equity?
Hey,
Thank
so
you.
let me interrupt and let's just stay on that theme, which is building an independent political. So I say political truth because, but really, what there is an independent movement. So let's 40% of Americans are not registered with any political party. But what is it that they what makes them not join the Republicans or the Democratic Party, or even affiliate with the Greens? But they remain aloof outside of the main party structure. Some would say they're mostly moderates who don't want to stay on any group. I certainly recognize as in my appeal for a political truth movement, that is a movement that I think that recognizes, for all the things you've laid out, that there's a fundamental corruption, and there's an economic corruption, that there is a true problem of a plutocratic billionaire class that has ineffectively taken control of the state agency through the simple regulatory capture of cycling personnel through state and private sector to have that influence, or the covert deep state operations of continuity of government, which you speak frankly about, Emanuel, in your speeches, in your book, and in other books. But in your theme on secret government. So let's just what are the prospects for the independent, for getting our kind of strong critique of the state crime, of the corruptedness of a government that's been in effect taken over and possessed? And you frankly talk about totalitarianism. I would, say, some might say that's hyperbole, but we did have a COVID mandate, and we did have a demand that people stand up and take it, and so on. So what about building let's just talk about making appeals to building a movement that's truly liberatory.
Right.
And I think it can't happen unless we speak the truth of the state crimes. That's how we're going to get the accountability.
You don't mind, Chuck? Maybe I'll just make a short response, and
Yeah.
then we can open up for discussion, either questions or comments. And my short response would be that the most important thing is not to be discouraged by the lack of immediate response, right? Whether inability to get in the corporate media, which now extends its reach into what's called alternative media, is a badge of honor, and we have to start with these small events and assume that, just like boiling water, right? You go through a period in which there seems nothing is happening, right? The water's is inactive, and then you reach a certain point at which the molecules start to vibrate, and then you start to get the water boiling. And we're at, I think, in this historical period and in this movement, we're at the point where we're just starting to get a few molecules to start moving. But when the water starts to boil, it's going to be obvious. It's like they say, things are impossible until they're inevitable. So I'm optimistic in that respect. However, think we're going to be facing unbelievable challenges, and that we have to have a sort of a. I'm not a militarist. I don't, advocate for solving things in a military sense, but that we're going to be what's going to be demanded of us is that sort of discipline and that sort of bravery. That if we want peace, as I mean, several people have said it. I don't know what the original quote is, but I think the Roman quote is, if you want peace, prepare for war, which I think is a extremely distorted understanding. But I would say that the other version is that if you want peace, you have to argue, protest for peace with at least the amount of bravery and organization and discipline as those advocating for war.
And people can raise hands and we can jump in and participate here. I've got it on gallery view. I'll just say that there is one of your essays in your book, the tonic on truth, is the idea of an inverted totalitarianism. I use the word that we are witnessing an emerging techno-totalitarianism. I accept the broad critiques that are being made from the left and the right on issues of the globalist project showing up through World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab's famous dictum, "You will own nothing, you'll be happy," and the loss of sovereignty. And I also accept the analysis from Catherine Watts and other, I guess, constitutionalists who read the Constitution through the 10th Amendment and find in the state powers the authority to effectively tell the FDA and the CDC, sorry, we're not accepting. And we're not accepting from WHO. So part of our independent political truth movement is speaking frankly and honestly to these power structure events that are unfolding in our midst. And we certainly, Jim, will speak to the WHO problem and give you a chance, Emanuel, to kind of, as the president of the US, what would you do? So we have this idea of an inverted totalitarianism. Emanuel, in your discussion on secret government, how tyranny overran the USA while we were watching YouTube. Just talk, this is from one of your essays. It's a good, clever title.
Also, I'll say two things about it,
yeah,
if you don't mind. So the first is regarding the globalist governance, that there's a certain tragic aspect to this, that when the Bush administration took over the United States in a military coup d'etat, which to this day, even in the conspiracy websites and alternative media, people don't really talk about what really happened between December 2000 and the beginning of the Iraq War. That there were a lot of people, for good reason, who gravitated towards global governance, to the United Nations and international compacts and treaties, because it seemed like a way to control this runaway idea of national sovereignty, meaning that the United States could do whatever it wanted. But tragically, that created a new dynamic in which the parasite class was clinging on to this nation state model under Bush as a way to push their agenda for world domination. They were able to migrate over to global institutions and use those to advance their agenda. And so we ended up with this very, very tragic situation, which we see now, in which many institutions which could serve valuable purposes have been completely subverted. Regarding the issue of the inverted totalitarianism, the professor at Princeton, whose name I'm now passed away a few years ago. What's the name?
I didn't write it down. Sorry, I can't help you.
Well, anyway, if I had to put a historical starting point, of course, it goes back to Ford Motors, and Standard Oil. But the starting point for us really is Microsoft Word. When Microsoft Word created these universal templates for writing, which were not flexible and which were undemocratic. But now we basically have a situation in which nothing's democratic, right? We have all these platforms like Facebook or YouTube, etc. But they're not participatory. You don't vote. They don't have constitutions. But they are becoming more powerful than the governments that are constitutional, and that has, of course, altered the nature of government. So the government becomes, as you know, it's in the United States. It is democratic in the sense that, to say, the Trump and Biden camps have different constituencies, right? That the Trump is backed by a lot of oil interests, about real estate speculation, about agribusiness, and a lot of weapons manufacturers, and they have very specific interests in Trump, and also hedge funds. And on the other side, we have a group of multinational investment banks and private equity, Hollywood and media, Google, and other IT interests who back Biden. So it is democratic in the sense that if you have assets above a certain amount, or your company has a certain degree of influence, you will be represented within this system. But it's not about people.
So thank you for that. So we just touched on some of the titles in your book, and let me just throw a couple of these out, and you can respond, and then we can loop back and close out talking about the what's kind of going on currently in our election. So you also have this interesting one, an idea for a constitution of information. It's a title. It's one of the speeches, and you open it. You question, the what is reality, and we live in a crisis of information. And I mean, it's just, as I said that, I flashed on the emergence of AI, but you're not even talking about AI here. You're simply talking about, well, you are going to be broaching.
Well, it's related.
So talk about that speech. Just give us some of the highlights on why is that important for us to take away from that.
So I want to respond first to the term AI. So AI is a term which is misused. Basically it's a strategy by a small number of very wealthy people to use the control of information as a weapon. It's not really a technology per se. It's rather a strategy, or maybe a rhetoric. The specific question of information and constitution information is to assure that we have reliable information. This is a real issue. However, it doesn't mean that we need to have a ministry of truth run by dictators. And how we would put this together, that's to say, how do we assure that information is reliable without empowering people to dominate and destroy us, is the question. That's why, I mean, I'm not telling you necessarily what the Constitution would be. Say that it should be participatory and have a real discussion about what we have to do about information. But the militarization issue, I mean, basically from the late 1990s in DARPA, Defense Advanced Research projects, can't remember anymore.
Research projects.
Something like that. They, in the late 90s, they had a series of classified reports talking about that the front line, the new realms of conflict were going to be information technology, biotechnology, and nanotechnology. And I think that's basically been followed through that's what's going on right now. So we're facing essentially a world war. It's not like, as I was saying about totalitarianism, it's not like there's a world war if we don't do, if we're not careful about what's happening in Russia. We're already in a world war. Let's just forget about the pretenses and address reality. That's what truth politics is about. One, the United States is a totalitarian government where we're trying to change and reform or overthrow. And second, we're already in a world war. However, the nature of the war, by this focus on information technology, i.e., distorting information to mislead and to manipulate and dumb down the population, nanotechnology, which is just emerging, which is the use of nanoparticles and machines and robots to destroy the environment or to attack people, and biotechnology, which of course the vaccine regime, vaccine COVID-19 operation is most representative, but is going very much more broadly now. That this is the front line in this war, but it doesn't exclude having traditional war in the sense of bombs and tanks and these operations, which are also going on. This is actually quite similar to what happened in the Second World War, in which you had one war, which was the tanks and fighter planes and bombers between Germany, its allies, and Russia and the United States and other countries. But you had at the same time in Europe, you had the Holocaust, the killing of a large many millions of people, Russian prisoners of war, Jews, and other minorities and others who were persecuted. These things took place simultaneously, but they were two different forms of war. And as you're aware, in the Allied discussions, there were people who were not interested. They were like playing stupid about what was going on in this other war, the war on people that was going on in Europe at the time. And there were people in the United States who didn't want to, they ignored those who said there's this Holocaust going on. And so we have a similar situation today, almost identical, I would say, in which we have these peace advocates saying, no to Gaza, no to, a war with Russia and arms for Ukraine, but they're silent on this other war which is going on, the war of biotechnology, nanotechnology, and information technology. It's really somewhat grotesque. And particularly, I find on the Gaza issue, which I brought up in several discussions, is very disturbing because people like Cornel West, who I'm not an anti-Cornel West guy. We've corresponded. We've never met. He says a lot of things which are accurate and valuable. But on Gaza, it's primarily about how the Palestinian people, as a sort of ethnic group, are suffering terribly. 100% true. I don't deny that for a moment. But the important thing to understand about Gaza is the way in which Israel, controlled by global finance and increasingly the cutting edge for IT in forms of warfare, in terms of surveillance, lawfare, robots, drones, and other strategies for degrading and destroying communities, is developing technologies in Gaza and West Bank operations, which are being exported. That the same firms that are doing this work in Gaza right now are bidding and have been given contracts on the US-Mexico border, are giving contracts for security and surveillance in your shopping mall, in your town. And so the ultimate answer about Gaza is that Gaza is your town. The technologies and the know-how that are being developed for Gaza as to how they slowly, systematically degrade a community, kill all the intellectuals, destroy block by block, track people, use intelligence fusion centers to get a three-dimensional live picture of what's going on, with basically every single person being tagged, that technology is for sale. It's being sold to the United States, being sold to Russia, being sold to China. It's being sold to your local community. And that is the real threat we're looking at.
So let me just interrupt there, or just give a break. And because you have in your book, one of your titles is "Possession is 9/10 of your soul." in this essay or this speech, you're warning about the billionaire class expanding ownership and diminishment of democracy. And so you're touching on that. You just gave a wide, broad swath of information there, and and what you shared is covered in several of your speeches, and you captured your concern about Gaza. That Gaza, in some ways, is a well. Let's. I mean,
Well, the
you have
analogy I used was Guernica in the one essay, right? That
right.
Guernica in 1937 was the moment at which the fascists decided that by purposely doing this brutal attack using new technology, including incendiary devices and bombers and new forms of what would later be called blitzkrieg, that they could show that they didn't care what their opinions of the world was, and that they were throwing down the gauntlet, saying to the world, "What we do to Guernica is what we'll do to you." And it's precisely what they did in Poland, and then later throughout Ukraine and Russia.
So let me just the thing there's so back to your this. So what's your criticism of that? You've written at length about explicitly calling out the billionaire class, and I mean, what would be a succinct way to represent the relationship of Israel to the United States in the context of you accept that there's a billionaire kind of
Right.
ruling class, a plutocracy? Is Israel a vassal state to the America, the
Right.
Western Anglo-American? How do you just make some remarks about the billionaire, why you
Okay.
call him out so strongly, and we'll put the spotlight back on you.
Right. So I'll say something about Israel, and then maybe we can just open up for comments, questions, and discussion. So I think that a lot of discussion about Israel is intentionally misguided. The media obviously is not blocking out the genocide going on in Gaza. It's amplifying it, if anything. So as I know, lots of criminal activities the United States has been engaged in around the world and domestically, they never show up on TV. So if Gaza is being featured at that level, then you know that there's some sort of a agenda hidden in there. So the unique aspect of Israel is this. I mean, really has to do with what happened at the end of the Second World War. I put it, we'll start with Dresden, really, the carpet bombing of Dresden. But that was when the United States totally moved away from an anti-fascist position to being seduced into taking over the riches of the British Empire. And so you had this fusion between the financial aspects of the City of London and its offshore holdings and this money laundering and trusts and ways of hiding assets that were very seductive, and that dragged the United States back into this empire. Of course, the operation to bring the United States back into the British Empire can be traced back to the end of the Civil War, but the specific issues had to do with the finance. And then Israel, which was the British experiment to get its fingers in or its hands on oil by establishing this colony in the Middle East, became part of this network, this hidden network. It was financed originally, but now it's really been transformed to be largely military and information technologies. So we have Israel as the hub. I don't want to say Israel controls everything because that would be inaccurate, but it's the hub for a whole series of surveillance technologies and systems technologies for outsourcing. Cisco is one of the big players in this. The head of Cisco is Ellison, is a good friend of Netanyahu. And so American power grids, American nuclear, or for that matter, Japanese nuclear power plants have their security systems run by often Israeli security firms. They use this as a way of for blackmail and intimidation. But basically, all governments have going digital and doing things online means it's not run by the government anymore. It's run by these contractors, and many of these contractors are tied to Israel. So Israel forms part of this sort of triad, right? London, City of London, finance, New York, Wall Street, and Washington, and then Tel Aviv, well, now Jerusalem, and they collaborate. They create this space in which, when the United States government gives $20 billion to Israel, it's not totally clear where the money goes, right? I mean, some of the money never goes to Israel. It just sort of swashes around among all these military contractors in the United States, many of which have Israeli interests to start with. And so we have this sort of effective government which has been created, which is unaccountable to the Constitution or to the governments of the United States, Britain, or for that matter, of Israel. But I want to open up for discussion and get everybody's feedback and input.
So Tom had his hand up. We can go to Tom right away. I mean, and if people don't raise their hands, I have some questions. But Tom, what give us? Please share.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. These aren't that urgent, but I just went through the table of contents and I listened to about a half an hour of your book, and I urge people to look at the table of contents because there's about a dozen different articles. I'd like to hear about China. I know about 3 people that live in China, and I get a completely different impression than I get from the mainstream. So your perspective on that would be great. And then the other a very specific thing, I'm touched and interested that you did something on Rainer Fuellmich, who's bounced between Germany and California, now and Mexico, and now is imprisoned, right, in Germany. Right. Yeah, and then I can't, maybe two more things. Censorship, and I don't know, well, the main thesis, the whole book, there's a chapter called The Bitter Truth, and I didn't get to that yet, and I mean, what is that? So maybe that's enough.
Right. Well, I don't know if I can answer all of them. Let's start with China, since I mean, I have a little bit. So my distinction as an American politician would be that I'm probably only American politician, maybe in history, who has a high level of fluency in Chinese, Japanese, and Korean. I read and I write these languages. I wouldn't say I'm a native speaker of them, but they are part of my expertise. And I was very disturbed to see in politics in America this effort to demonize China, combined with a total ignorance of China. Most Americans can't name any Chinese other than Xi Jinping. I worked with people in the U.S. government. They have no idea, like, who the mayor of Shanghai is, or what Sichuan is, or what China does, what it is, what its concerns are. And China is 1 out of 6 people in the world. This effort to demonize China is truly, well, it's insane, and it's destructive for the United States. At the same time, I think we have to recognize the very incestuous and destructive relationship between the United States and China that dates back really to the Nixon agreement to normalize relations, something which I think is glorified in a way it doesn't deserve to. The very disturbing nature of that new relationship between the United States and China has not really been explored. It's sort of a taboo subject in both China and the United States. But I think in the case of the COVID-19 operation, although we don't have all the details, I think it's reasonable to assume that it was basically a joint operation between the United States and China at the beginning, and that the 2 countries cooperated, and that there's basically this effort to say that there's a Cold War, that Chinese can't talk to Americans, that Chinese military intelligence are enemies, that this is, of course, true at some level, but it's also a way of hiding the degree to which they collaborate. And the collaboration has been very negative. Efforts to use underpaid workers in China and China's capacity and its lack of regulation as a way to undermine the American economy, but also to oppress the Chinese people, because the pushing forward of a cashless online economy in China, Chinese, I think the analysts for the investment banks figured out that China's weak point was the fact that it had been behind in technology since the Opium War, really. And so if you went to Chinese and said something like, you won't use cash, you can do everything online, and you're going to be even more advanced than the Westerners, right? China will finally come of age. And there's a whole group of like Jeffrey Sachs and others who go around saying this to the Chinese and to the Americans. And this was really a sort of grotesque project, right? In which you would push on the Chinese these things which other countries wouldn't accept. And the Chinese would accept it because they were flattered to believe they were somehow taking the lead in these new technologies, and then use that to then push them back on countries around the world because of China's economy of scale. So personally, the thing I would like to see the most is alliance between the peoples of China and the United States to fight back in both countries against totalitarian rule, again, by the same group of usual suspects, right? IT, global IT, and private equity, et cetera. The second, I can't respond to everything.
Yeah, wait, before you leave China, what about the right, there's right-wing Chinese that come to the US and they badmouth China, and then there's
I didn't hear
typical, let me see if turn the volume up. There's right-wing Chinese that have, speak about China in the US and the evil Communist Party on and on, and so
evil
there's
Communist
that,
Party.
then
Right.
in addition, there's this trope about the Uyghurs, or I can't even pronounce it, but I mean,
right. Well,
and,
this is probably beyond the scope of this discussion, but I'll just say briefly about the Chinese Communist Party. Chinese Communist Party has become a deeply corrupt institution. It's corrupted by the same cast of characters, and I think we should speak honestly about the negative impact of the Chinese Communist Party. However, I think that you could take the perspective the Chinese Communist Party is in some respects preferable to the Democratic Party and the Republican Party because it's more transparent, and because it's part of the government, it's required to disclose some of its activities, as opposed to the Democratic Party, which is basically a criminal syndicate that engages in money laundering and represents various secretive billionaires and IT firms, and now Israeli intelligence operatives. And so very, very disturbing. So I think the best way to deal with the Chinese Communist Party is to be honest and say, Chinese Communist Party is very corrupt. It's engaged in all these globalist agendas, which are very dangerous. It's just like our Democratic Party. Let's be honest with ourselves, and then reach out to our fellow citizens in China and say, let's work together with Green Liberty, for example, to start and create accountable, democratic, and constitutional governance in our countries and all the way up to the top. And let's stop the rule by these multinational corporations and the trust funds behind them.
Hey, let me just jump in here and just say I accept, what you're saying, Emanuel. I accept your analysis. China's an interesting problem because from my perspective and understanding, are quite severe. If you're not Han, and you have, you speak in different language and so on. And if you're religious, you run into trouble with the
Oh, it's
state.
true. It's true. It's
you
true.
know.
But
So
it's not worse than I don't think it's worse than what the United States is doing, but it definitely is
well,
bad.
and I think if you're African American, and I'm only saying this as sociologically speaking, and that your encounter with state power and the problem of state agency is a big problem, and so there's a relativity there and a relativism around. So we're talking about building an independent movement that would speak to the things that you speak to. And I think that you speak honestly and forthrightly and frankly in a way that is a kind of a tonic, truth.
It's a
That's the
bitter,
point of the
bitter
book.
time.
This is it. This is the point that through honest discussion and normalizing talking about things that are taboo, whether it's the JFK assassination, 9/11, the COVID program, and so on. And now the Gaza, and we could, I mean, if we wanted to spend a little more time on the Gaza, the parallel between the 10/7 and our 9/11, in effect, was a let it happen, cause it to happen, stage it to happen.
I guess I want to add
make
to
some
that.
remarks about that. Please go ahead.
Just say we have more recently the Francis Scott Key Bridge incident, which is, of course, it's so recent, it's still opaque for us. But this it looks like it may have the same scale of implication as 9/11.
Well, the same signature. Well, you're right, and I'm okay. So since we're talking about it's
Well,
to be
it's so
current.
new. The
No.
information. So
Yeah, what do you think is suspicious about that incident?
Well,
the
let me
incident?
go ahead, Emanuel. What do you think?
Oh, well, so I'm not an expert on it, but I've now read. I listened to the interview. Was it Michael Flynn talking with Alex Jones? And I thought it was reasonably coherent discussion about the problematics of the event. And then I read several articles talking about the release of hazardous materials from the container ship, which then stopped people from being able to conduct research rescue operations around the bridge. And so the argument which has been made is one, it's one of the few. It's next to Washington D.C. Obviously, it's one of the few trains that's allowed to carry large cargo and dangerous things like radioactive or toxic chemicals, because the other train tracks on the East Coast don't allow you to do that. So taking down that bridge has an immediate infrastructure impact. Of course, the port, the bay itself is critical for the Washington area, Baltimore area, and destroying the bridge and the attack has broad implications. And finally, as many people have pointed out, it seems to be based upon the movie. Was it I'm not forgetting the title. Say Goodbye to the World. Was it the Obama's movie where there's
That's imbecilic. That's imbecilic. It's imbecilic because that showed a large ship beaching itself, and what could happen? I don't know. All I saw was the ship beaching itself, and I don't know what happened afterwards. How far could it get? Because the sand is certainly more powerful.
Yeah, I totally agree. The movie, but so anyway, I don't know what's going on. Just saying that there's a significant discussion in the United States going on off the record out there about this. Did you have a position or opinion?
Well, of course, my opinion is subject to what's uncovered, the evidence. But so far, I've only seen one thing that makes me think there might be something askew, and that is that the day before it happened, they assigned a new head of the FBI office to the Baltimore area.
Interesting. I didn't hear that.
And yeah. But his specialty is a WMD, hazardous materials, and yeah,
Can't make it up.
yeah. So that's the only thing I can see. But otherwise, as far as the
I'd like that information.
yeah, where his what the heck is his name? I forget his name, but I think I may have posted it in the email. William
Okay.
something or other. You can look it up.
So I was thinking actually about writing on this specific topic, but I hesitated just because we don't have enough information yet.
All right.
Well,
So
let me,
as far
let-
as I just want to say this. As far as I can see, the mechanics of what happened to the ship, there was nothing suspicious about that unless there was sabotage in terms of getting of blacking out the electricity. Um, uh, but
so,
you
Judy,
know, there were I was looking at this on Facebook yesterday, and there are all these rumors and shit, and there's so much fear porn. It really makes me sick. Um, the just looking at the facts. I mean, this FBI thing is the only thing that raises.
so wait. Let's do this. Okay, we're gonna actually end this recording, but before we end the recording, I want to give James Roguski just a moment to just plug the work of exiting WHO. You could give some historic background around. I mean, I think it had some virtue at the beginning, maybe not, but immediately the WHO did call a quote pandemic in March of 2020, which then put the country into lockdown, onto a path of vaccination of an experimental mRNA technology. Can I put the spotlight on you, Jim, and just give us and I think you accept that there is an emerging totalitarianism. We've used that word totalitarian. Some people say it's hyperbole, but you could just respond and I'm going to put the spotlight on you, and then we're going to close and we can hang out for some conversation after the ending of the recording. Jim.
I will be happy to throw you a really big curveball.
Okay.
Okay. I would venture to guess that almost everybody here is not as deep down the rabbit hole as I am about the WHO. Okay. I think that's a safe bet.
Yep.
I can tell you that almost everything you think you know about what's going on with the WHO is probably about as confused as what people think they know about the bridge in Baltimore.
Right.
You know the story, some people call it by many names. I've heard it called telephone. You know, you tell a story, they tell a story, they tell a story.
Oh, yeah.
The story with the WHO is there are negotiations going on. And so that means everything is in a state of flux. Almost everybody who's talking about this is locked into the position that they started talking about more than a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
And when you actually look at how things have changed and you look at the negotiations and you listen to who is saying what, and you actually really understand the soap opera that's going on here, okay, I could venture to say that probably everything you think you know is wrong, if only because it's fluid. And if you haven't checked in lately with what's going on, you've got old news. And so I published an article, I think it was yesterday, it's all a blur, red herrings. So go read the article, Red Herrings. I think, Emanuel, I think you at some point said you wanted to speak on, what's going on. Happy to talk to you anytime, anywhere, whatever. I think you've got my contact info. We're on Telegram or whatever.
Yeah, I got it.
There's 5 videos at the top of that article, and I get it. It's a lot of watching, but hey, I've done about 5,000 hours worth of research to boil it down to those 5 videos. So the challenge that I think we're dealing globally is the information is coming, fast and furious. Everyone's on overload, and not too many people are truly practicing the scientific method, where you go, oh, here's what I think it is, but then there's this new information. Okay. Oh, the jabs are safe and effective, but maybe they're not. Okay. Some people had the mental flexibility to go, hey, wait a minute. They told me this, but now they're telling me, wait a minute. Okay. Look in the mirror and ask yourself, is it possible for you to have that flexibility in your thinking on everything? Oh, hell no. You don't have time. Okay. How do you know if the new information is fake or real or whatever? And so don't say anything about what's going on with the WHO if you're working on anything that's old news, because it's changing. And that's one of the things that got us into this COVID problem, got us into all kinds of problems, is when new information comes in, if you're suffering from cognitive dissonance or confirmation bias or
trauma,
a lot of people trust hearsay. Oh, I heard Alex Jones said, right? Well, maybe what Alex Jones said was backed by fact, or maybe he was just spouting off and he said something. Okay. People don't have the time to go to the source material and go, wait a minute, somebody said something about that, but I went and read it and it says something totally different. Wait a minute, what the hell is going on here? And so to wrap it up with the WHO, it is probably not what you think it is. And if you go to Red Herrings, the latest article, and I got another one coming out tomorrow, boy, it is not what everybody is saying about it, because they're talking about stuff that's old and it's fluid. So,
And let's take that as a warning. So I want to I'm going to put the spotlight on myself. We're going to formally kind of just close down our recording, and we'll hang out and talk some more. I'm going to put the spotlight on Emanuel. And so I don't know what your schedule is, Emanuel. We're going to end the recording, but we're going to hang out and talk further. And I just want to say that this is a Green Liberty Town Hall. We want to do more of these, you and I, Emanuel, to normalize speaking around possibilities for a better society. That for me is necessary, and because of a ruling plutocracy has so corrupted our history, and we can have all kinds of discussion about reclaiming lost history that was stolen from us by the state crimes, especially the JFK in the 1960s. If those people had lived and not been taken out, then and allowed to influence the course of American history and culture and politics, we may very well be at a very different place in our society than where we are now. So a final word from you, Emanuel, then we'll end our recording.
I want to thank everybody for joining us today to talk about the potential of green liberty. And I would just close by saying that the reason for claiming to be a candidate for president of the United States, in my mind, is that I have just as much legitimacy or more than any of these other candidates. That none of the other ones are legitimate candidates. They all got where they are with the backing of billionaires, not through any sort of democratic or intellectual or scientific process, and that we have to face the bitter truth, right? Drink the bitter tonic and that is to say that this election is not going to be a real election, and that we're going to have to rebuild the United States and the whole global system basically from the ground up. And that's really what the Green Liberty Project, I think, is going to be. And thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you, Emanuel. We're ending the recording and come back for more from Green Liberty Town Hall.